Imposter syndrome is that overwhelming feeling of self-doubt, or like you're not good enough, or you're not competent of your achievements. You might have that feeling like, but people might find out and expose me for having this self-doubt, for not thinking I'm good enough. This imposter syndrome is something I've definitely experienced in my life. And actually, fun fact, 70 to 80% of us experience imposter syndrome. And it's something I've recently noticed has come up with my clients and with some people in my life. And I wanted to do a whole episode on this because what I mainly want to share with you today is why this imposter syndrome, as difficult and uncomfortable as it might feel, is actually a good thing and a good sign, and means that there's amazing things right around the corner. But before we dive in, don't forget to press follow or subscribe wherever you are listening to Fulfilled. This would mean the world to me and also give you access to both episodes every single week on your journey when they come out. So why is imposter syndrome a sign that you're on the right path? Recently, I was with my sister-in-law earlier this week, and she's thinking of entering the health and wellness space. And she brought up this idea that I'd feel like an imposter, right? Like I don't even know where to start. And she explained that imposter syndrome is a big thing that's keeping her where she is. And she asked, did you feel imposter syndrome when you started, the podcast and what you're doing? And I was like, 1,000,000%. Like, absolutely. Like she said, it's one of the biggest things that actually kept me from starting and going for it. The imposter syndrome that I felt in starting the podcast was the strongest when I was starting out and before I even started. It was that daunting overwhelm of, but what if I'm not good enough? Who's going to listen to me? Like, who am I to start a podcast? But what I noticed is when I actually started anyways, the imposter syndrome slowly but surely started to get smaller and smaller. It felt very strong when I was in my first couple episodes of literally recording in my walk-in closet into my iPhone, no equipment. I didn't even tell my friends and family about it because I was so terrified of like being found out for wanting to start a podcast and going for it. But now, almost 2 years in, and feeling a lot more experienced and confident in what I'm doing and actually proving to myself every single week and not missing an episode that I am a podcaster and that I can do it, that imposter syndrome has felt less and less strong in my life. And so in reflecting in the imposter syndrome that I felt on this podcast journey, it's not that I felt like an imposter. I think what I was really feeling was I was such a beginner. The reality is I wasn't trying to prove to anyone that I'm like an expert or a professional podcaster. That wasn't like the message I was trying to send. And so there wasn't anything that I was going to be found out about, if that makes sense. Like nothing that people were going to reveal and show that like I wasn't what I seemed, because all I was doing was starting a podcast, and that's exactly what I was doing. And in proving to myself every week and doing the episodes that I can create the podcast and that I can show up and do it, I felt less and less like an imposter and less like a beginner because of that consistency and taking action and taking steps. And something I find so interesting is I was listening to a podcast, I think it was either Ed Milet or Mel Robbins or something like that. And it was an interview with them and some person that was also like top of their field kind of person, like definitely expert. And they shared that they all still battle imposter syndrome every single day. People who we would never imagine battle imposter syndrome still feel imposter syndrome. Every single person, no matter where they are, feels imposter syndrome. It's not something that just goes away. Even my mom, who's 15 years into her career, she still shares that whenever she raises the price on a wedding, she's a wedding planner, or when she gets recognized in a magazine or speaks in front of people, because she's like killing it and doing great now, she still feels that imposter syndrome. It still comes up. And so what that helped me recognize in my imposter syndrome journey is it's not like there's any path or starting out any venture where someone doesn't feel imposter syndrome. In fact, even years into the journey, that imposter syndrome is still there. So what I took that as is a sign that imposter syndrome is not a reason to stop. It's a reason to keep going. Because as I shared, the imposter syndrome felt the strongest in the beginning of my journey, either before I started the podcast or when I was totally a beginner and I was like, this podcast is so terrible. Like when I listened to like ones that were actually good and been doing it for years, I'm like, I am embarrassed by the quality of this, but I'm going to keep going because I know it'll get better with time. And so how imposter syndromes become less and less prominent and powerful over me is by continuing to take steps. continuing to learn and grow through action. Another way I felt imposter syndrome is starting to be a coach. Part of my limiting beliefs that I had to work through was, who's going to listen to a 27-year-old coach? Like, especially if my clients are older than me, like I feel like such an imposter. They're going to find out that I'm younger. Until I realized that a coach has nothing to do with offering elderly advice. It's someone that's trained to use skills and tools and reflective listening and powerful questioning to help you, the client, get to the answers and truth that's within you and be that support to hold you accountable. It has nothing to do with me projecting advice onto clients' life based on what's worked for me. And so I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but ultimately starting out as a coach, I felt this imposter syndrome because I'm like, I've never, been a coach before, and, I'm younger, who's gonna want to be my client. But again, that feeling of imposter syndrome was strongest before I started. And then when I started working with my first few clients, again, the imposter syndrome was definitely still there because I'm like, do they know I'm still pretty new at this? But now, as I've worked with a bunch of different clients and feel a lot more experienced as a coach and more confident from the feedback I've gotten and the positive results I've seen, the imposter syndrome feels less powerful and it feels not as daunting and not as overwhelming. And it's because I've continued to learn and grow and take steps. The only reason I felt like an imposter was because I was new at it. I was still a beginner, both in the podcast space and the coaching space. I think what this imposter syndrome is really here to teach us is that there's always room for growth. There's always ways to improve and learn and get better. The imposter syndrome is actually a nudge for us to continue down the path, not for us to stop. Because the only way that the imposter syndrome starts to have less power over us is continuing down that path or that realm that feels new and scary at first. Because the more experienced we are in that and the more action we take to be consistent and to learn from mentors in that field and from doing the work and actually taking steps to improve in that way and feel like less of an imposter and less of a beginner, the imposter syndrome doesn't weigh us down so much and doesn't feel so daunting. And so this is a perfect segue into why imposter syndrome is a really positive sign. So I heard this idea recently, and I'm not sure if any of you have heard it, that if you feel imposter syndrome, that's just a sign that transformation's right around the corner. And at first when I heard this, I was like, I don't really understand how the imposter syndrome that I feel has anything to do with amazing changes that are about to come in my life. All this imposter syndrome really feels like is like I'm not good enough and like I'm not worthy to do this and like I should pump the brakes and stop and pick a totally different path. But now I actually understand why it's a positive sign and why it's such a sign of growth. Because imposter syndrome means that we're challenging ourselves to step into a new realm, to try something new, to take a risk and venture into an area that we would be a beginner in, that we don't know much about, that we don't have much experience in. It's a sign that we're stepping outside of our comfort zone. So this imposter syndrome that we're feeling is a natural response to venturing outside of our comfort zone. So in that way, it's a positive thing. Because like I shared, every single person, from the top podcasters to the top coaches to the top of fill in the blank of whatever it is you're feeling imposter syndrome in, they all felt it and they all feel it. And so if you feel it, it means that you are stepping outside of your comfort zone, that you are taking a risk to step into your full potential. And this is actually why imposter syndrome is a huge theme and recurring block and limiting belief that I see with all my clients, because they all start working with me to incorporate new exciting changes into their life, to take steps towards their passions and dreams. And of course, in those initial steps, and even before you start, the imposter syndrome is so real. But that's where I come in to help them see that this is a good thing. All this means is that you're a beginner, and the more that you take action and the more you take steps and learn and gain confidence through action, the less power that imposter syndrome has over you. So quick aside, if you notice imposter syndrome being something really prevalent in your life, these are the exact kind of limiting beliefs and blocks that I help clients with. So I would love to learn about this imposter syndrome that you're feeling and learn about these changes and new ventures that you want to delve into. I'll include my website linked below if you want to explore a free clarity call together to connect with me and learn more about my life coaching practice. Anyways, back to it. So this imposter syndrome is a positive sign that we are venturing outside outside of our comfort zone to take steps towards a more fulfilling life and towards changes that is going to light us up and fulfill us more. And that leads me to this final shift that I want to kind of tie this all together with, a perspective that I think a lot of us need to hear that actually really changed the way that I see it. So imposter syndrome is actually a good thing, right? It means growth is right around the corner. It means we're taking steps towards transformation and towards growing and expanding in this beautiful way. So therefore, maybe a lack of imposter syndrome means we're playing it too safe. Maybe it means that we need to take steps to feel more imposter syndrome, to be that beginner, to challenge ourselves in new ways. Avoiding imposter syndrome and avoiding that uncomfortable feeling of being bad at something at first, of being a beginner, is never going to push us and challenge us to step into a life that actually fulfills us and lights us up. Another example from my personal life is when I started posting on social media for the podcast, I again was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. My videos are so bad. And it felt super vulnerable. And I was like, people are going to actually see this? Like, that is terrifying. But a couple years later, and with every video that I posted, it felt less and less powerful. And I was proving to myself every single time that the answer here isn't to not continue to venture down this path and shove it aside and just stay with what feels comfortable. The answer is to lean into that imposter syndrome, continue to post videos and create podcast episodes, get better at it. Go towards the imposter syndrome, not away from it. And that's why that quote says that imposter syndrome is a sign that transformation is coming for you and that you're on the path of growth and positive things coming into your life. Because imposter syndrome means you're taking steps towards that thing, towards learning, towards these pursuits and passions that you might have been too scared to go into before. And so no matter what you're feeling imposter syndrome in, starting the podcast, posting the video, taking the singing class, applying for that job that seems so out of reach, just dipping your toe into the water of that thing that you know nothing about, that feels new and intimidating, but deep down you know you want to adventure into it, just remember these things. The imposter syndrome's a good sign. All it means is that you're a beginner. And even the top people in those fields still feel imposter syndrome and definitely felt it in the beginning when they were starting out. There's no path that we can avoid this feeling of imposter syndrome in. And it's absolutely not a sign to stop or that you're not good enough. It's a sign to keep going. Because the more you keep going and the more you keep taking steps and taking action to learn and improve and grow in that space, in that new realm, the less power the imposter syndrome is going to have over you. So I hope something resonated in today's episode for you. If you did, it would mean the world to me if you left a rating on the show wherever you're listening, on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Rate the show and leave a comment. I would love your thoughts, and this is really meaningful and impactful to help in my efforts to grow fulfilled and create this community and inspire you every week. So thank you again for being here, and I'll see you all again soon on your journeys to living this life fully.